Good morning, this is Edie Twining and I'm here interviewing David McCulloch, who
Good morning.
would love to have you tell us the story of the farm and living in Old Lyme.
Okay. My story begins in 1929, the year that my mother and father bought the property on Whipwell Road, and the year of my birth, 1929, and also the year of the big crash. They bought a relatively small piece of land with a house for which there was no charge. It was in such poor condition. And that's the house I grew up in Old Lyme. No heat upstairs, no electricity, a hand pump for water in the kitchen. And we finally, over the years, modernized it somewhat. And when electricity poles slowly grew up Whipwell Road, we finally had electricity. Before that we used kerosene lamps and gas lamps and so on. Yeah. Then my mother had worked at a camp in New Jersey for underprivileged kids from New York. And she wanted to start the same thing here. She started a farm, a camp called Camp Aladdin. And it was a social experiment for them. The kids made all the rules, and the what do you call them? The counselors had to kind of soften the rules a little bit because children always wanted to make the punishments more severe than they should. Anyway, they ran that for several years, and during that time, my father built a couple of buildings on the farm to house the students. We call them bunkhouses. I don't know how long that lasted, and I don't really remember anything of that camp myself. I was too young. So
your father was working at Yale at that time?
Father was working at Yale as a neurophysiologist. He was interested in mapping the cortex of the brain to see what was where in the brain and what it controlled. Now that's all done with MRI and modern techniques that were not available at those days. It was all done with microelectrodes and so on. Very, very different sort of business. I remember, for example, they were testing the response of a muscle. So they put the muscle between 2 points, and they'd stimulate it and watch it contract. And that physical contraction went to an arm that wrote a thing on a rotating smoke drum. That tells you the kind of instrumentation they had.
Wow.
Versus modern stuff.
Yeah. But he set the stage for many things that came after him, yes?
Oh, absolutely.
Neurologically,
yeah. And he continued in neurophysiology his entire life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then he was also building things on the farm, and you started to help as you got older, right?
Right. We built almost all the buildings on the farm. It's about 4 buildings, it's 2 dams, it's all kinds of things we built. Life on the farm was a continual building. Yeah.
So you built the stone barn, went and got stones out in the woods with horse-drawn sledge and...
I'd take a horse and a sledge, go off into the fields or the backwoods and get stones to bring them back, where we'd build the walls. We built the walls with masonry that we all hand did, all mixing, no machine mixing in those days.
Wow.
So, yeah.
And did you like the building part of it? Was that good?
Very much enjoyed the building part, and it's kept me in good stead. Since then, I've built 3 houses, designed and built 3 houses, so I've had a wonderful time building. I consider that one of my major accomplishments, yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
And I seem to recall at one point you finally got a tractor.
Everything we did on the farm we did by hand, everything. So when we finally got a tractor, and I saw what a tractor could do with a little bit of gasoline, I was startled. I mean, I don't think most people realize nowadays they've never had that transition from all handwork to machine work. It was amazing to me.
Yeah.
That's
great.
Big change in my life.
And your mother was really into the farming part, right? She was into the animals and the...
Right. My mother was born and raised in New York City and couldn't wait to get out of it. Went to Wellesley came back to New York and then said, no, I'm out of here. When they married, they moved here, and she started farming. She started farming with the help of a blacksmith that my father had brought up from New Jersey, where he had previously built a house. And this blacksmith lived with us until he finally died in the middle age from too much alcohol. He was an absolute constant drinker, couldn't break himself of it. Anyway, he taught her how to farm.
Oh, okay.
So that's how she learned a lot about farming. Yeah, and she was the consummate farmer. We almost all of our food we grew on the farm, and even the meat. We butchered pigs, we butchered cows, and so on. Yeah.
Wow.
So we were pretty self-sufficient.
And then at some point, you guys built a dam.
There was a big swamp on the farm, and my father cleared the swamp and built the dam. That dam was built when I was very young.
Oh.
I can barely remember it. But I had the pleasure, if you want to call it that, of the ice from the lake had chiseled way into the dam on the lakeside. So when I was, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, so I jackhammered off all of that part of the dam, re-poured the dam to make the modern dam.
Wow.
But it had to be done, otherwise it would have failed. Yeah.
So not so long ago, you rebuilt that.
That's right. And
Wow.
then we built a lower dam on another swamp just below it. So we have two lakes on two dams. The other dam is largely built underground. You can hardly see it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And did you spend your whole time in Old Lyme, or did you move at some point?
When I was young, it was full time. Then when I started, my father moved to University of Chicago and was there for a number of years in the psychology department, physiology department. And I guess during that time we lived in about 4 or 5 different places in Illinois.
Okay.
Yeah. But always coming back to the farm. The farm was always my home. That's how I felt it. Even though the rooms weren't heated in the winter. What you did is, when you went to bed, you took all your clothes into bed with you to keep them warm. Then when you got up in the morning, you tried to dress in your bed if you could. If you couldn't, you run down to the kitchen where my mother had built a fire on the wood stove. That wood stove also, it was a big cast iron stove with a water back. Excuse me. A water back, for those who don't know, is the water from there went to the bathtub. It was the way you heated the water for the bathtub from the stove.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
So you'd always come home for the summers, even though you were in Chicago, right?
Right. So I spent all my summers here on the farm.
Yeah.
Working.
That's pretty great.
It was a lot of work, especially when we started with a dairy herd. We had a dairy herd of Guernseys, maybe 10 or so, I've forgotten the number, maybe 10 or so cows. My typical day was get up, bring the cows in, feed them, milk them, kick them out when they're done, clean the barn, take the milk you already put in an ice house that my mother and I built. Take the 40-quart cans out and take them to the dairy. Come back, clean the barn, and then I had breakfast. And then we started the day. That's the life of any dairy, is that?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
We did that for a number of years.
So you and your siblings would do that? Is that
Pardon?
you and your sisters and
No, mostly I would do the physical work, yeah.
You were the worker bee.
Yeah. But they all did other things too. We all worked,
Yeah.
No, the barn was my provenance.
So your main interest is in oceanography, right? Or
No, geology.
geology. Okay.
I've done some oceanography, and I've done a lot of submarine geology.
Okay.
I surveyed all the structure of the continental shelf along the west coast, all of California,
Wow.
and mapped that so that it's very interesting because rocks are brought up from through the millennia from the south along the San Andreas Fault So here are all these strange rocks that have been imported and jammed in along the coast
Wow.
of California.
Interesting.
So part of what I did was to unravel part of that history.
So
Yeah.
you left when you got out of high school. You went to college where?
Well, let's see, after high school, I didn't want to go to school. I had enough school. Does that sound familiar? So my father said, hey, I've got a friend who runs a laboratory in Geneva in Switzerland. You want to go work for him? So I said, absolutely, work for him for a year. Save what little money I could. I wasn't making much money. And I went to England, to Scotland, to Wales, to Germany, to France on my own. Germany you could just barely get into because it was so close after the end of the war. It really wasn't open. And then came home and decided, well, you know, all these things you've seen, you better go to college. So I went to Tufts for 3 years and then told the dean I wanted to take a year off. He said, why? I said, I want to read what I want to read. I felt I dearly love to read. Anyway, so he said, well, if you go, you'll never come back. I said, yeah, I'll come back. So I took a year off, worked in 2 boatyards over in Essex, Jenks's yard and Russ Graves' yard, which is no longer there. And let's see, where did I go from there? Then I went to, I was asked by a friend of mine who was a sailor working for Woods Hole, an officer, if I'd like to go on a cruise with him. So I joined Woods Hole for a year. We sailed down through the islands and so on, doing work which was classified at the time, called SOFAR. They had trouble trying to find people who were downed in airplanes in the ocean. So they said, okay, we'll set off a bomb from the airplane and we'll listen from 2 points on land. We'll triangulate and find out where they are and go pick them up. What they forgot was that the Gulf Stream, as it comes up the coast, leaves big swirls and eddies of hotter water. So it changes travel time. So it turned out to be a bust, but that's all right. They tried it anyway.
You win some, you lose some.
Yeah, that's right.
And didn't you also spend some time in the Arctic?
When I, let's see, how did, that really is my time in the Geological Survey.
Okay.
So, yeah, no, I went from there, and went back to Tufts, finished the year, and got a job working on the Massachusetts Turnpike, where I wound up running part of the bedrock boring program and the sediment analysis for structural strength under bridges and so on. And then I got fed up with that job pretty quickly. There was so much politics going on among the contractor and so on. So I quit, came back, rebuilt a boat that I had since I was maybe 17 or 18. I had a Friendship sloop, a 36-footer.
Wow.
And I came back, I built a cabin on the top and built all the bed bunks and so on inside. And then Steve Hoag, who was Reverend Hoag's son, who'd been my roommate at college, and I and my sweetheart took off. We left here in December, sailed down the coast to Norfolk. We didn't get all the way there. We got into the Delaware River, and we were going to cross the canal into the Chesapeake, but it was frozen over, so they wouldn't let us go. So we spent about a month keeping floating ice from damaging the boat. Finally got through, went into the Chesapeake, sailing down the Chesapeake, and threw a rod out of the motor. So we limped into Charleston. We're there for a day, and the guy who ran the boatyard said, how'd you like to run the boatyard for me? We said, swell. So we ran the boatyard for a couple of months while our motor was being rebuilt. And then while I was there, a contractor who'd worked on the Mass Turnpike came in and said, I'm looking for some guys to give me a hand. Well, I had kind of been at loggerheads with him because I caught some of his guys fudging some data. But he hired me anyway. So Steve and I went to work for him on a drilling barge in the Chesapeake River. They wanted to make, what's the city up the James River? Oh, I can't remember the name right now. Anyway, they wanted to make the James River a deep water river, to make a deep water port upriver.
Okay.
So we worked on the drilling barge. And the drilling barge was a diamond drill rig with a driller who was an alcoholic, and myself on the barge, and Steve helped lay out the groundwork ahead. We did that for, I don't know how many months. And finally I said to my boss, you know, my sweetheart and I are thinking of getting married, and so I'm giving you notice. He said, oh, hell, walked away. Nothing like thank you or great. Anyway, we sailed back up the coast and got married in Saybrook. Had it not been that her mother was a churchgoer, we would have been married there, but we did largely to have a church wedding for her mother. So it was a very nice time. And then I decided, okay, time to stop fooling around, back to school. So I sold the boat, split the cash that I got with Steve, and then went off to University of Michigan.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, and then your main time was in California too, right? It was,
Yeah,
San
after
Francisco.
I finished in Michigan, and they suggested to the Geological Survey that they hire me, which was great. I had interviewed other jobs, which I really wasn't very much interested in, but that's a plum job in geology. So I was there from 1960, 69 to 1981.
Wow.
I was there, almost 30 years, yeah. And had a wonderful time. I worked in Alaska most of the time. Worked with 2 Eskimos, or 1 Eskimo, and a skin boat, or wooden boat, mostly a skin boat. Got to know the Eskimos very well. Had a wonderful time with the Eskimos. Yeah. We worked in coastal Alaska. Yeah.
Very cool. And so in 81 you moved back to Old Lyme, or?
Let's see, where did I go from there? No, I went right from Alaska. I went to California.
Okay.
Into the Geological Survey there, staying there.
Yeah.
And was there in a place now publicized as Palo Alto. Everybody knows with the investment company and so on. Yeah. And was there for years. Yeah.
Yeah. And but Old Lyme was always in your blood, I guess. So that brought you back.
Every year I came back. I'd come back every year to do things. I would save up all my time and take my leave as a block to come back here. And so one year I put a new floor in a building. Another year I moved a building off of its foundation, built a floor underneath it, moved the building back onto it. So it turned it into a 2-story building on the farm.
Wow.
Did all, because I love to do physical things. So
Yeah.
I'm not happy sitting in an office.
That's what's keeping you going, I think.
That's right. Oh, with the dairy, I think in the dairy business, it got me going.
Yeah, that's right.
Haying was a brutal job. Haying originally, you cut the grass and raked the grass with a horse, and then you worked around the edges of the edges of the field with a scythe, so as to trim it back in. Then you had all the hay was on the ground. If it rained, you had to go turn the hay over to keep it dry. When it finally was dried, you raked it up in a long windrows, and then you went along the windrows and you changed those into small haycocks. Then you came along with a horse-drawn wagon, or later a power wagon, and you put those up onto the truck.
Wow.
Drive that to the barn, or you pick them up with a rake and with a fork and bring them into the barn and dump them. Inside the barn, which is where I was, when the barn gets pretty full in this, here comes this bale of hay in through the door, which blocks out all the light. You put your fork into the hay and against the rafter, so that when the hay load goes by you, it doesn't sweep you down the hay.
Wow.
So it saves you. Then you take the hay and distribute it all over the load, all over the other hay. So I remember coming out of there with my sweat soaked almost down to my knees in my pants.
Wow.
It was so hot.
Yeah, yeah.
We did this for our barn, for Muller's barn. I don't know if you. Muller's barn is the barn at the end of Whipwell Road and Mile Creek Road. Now
okay.
in residence.
Uh-huh.
The hottest barn I've ever worked in. And DeWolf's barn. So we filled 3 barns full of hay.
Wow.
We hayed most of the lots along the along White Sand Beach area.
Okay.
Because there were no other farmers haying then.
Okay.
Yeah. And
Wow.
all that hay went to feed our cows.
Wow,
Cows
that's
and horses,
amazing.
yeah.
And and then also your father added more property to the original farm, right?
Yeah, my father was very interested in building up a larger piece of land and in getting control over the swamplands to protect the waterways that were running down through the farm. So he got a transit and a plane table and a stadia rod to tell distance, and he and my older sister, several years older than me, I was too young, mapped all the properties adjacent to ours. People in those days didn't really know their boundaries. They knew where they could cut wood, and they called them woodlots, but they weren't aware of where their boundary, and there were no maps. So he mapped from the old descriptions of the land what the boundaries were, and I remember one of the markers in the deed written in 18-something was a place where a beech tree once stood. Well, you can imagine the trouble he had in finding those markers, but he found them.
Wow.
I remember later, and many years later, we were walking in the woods, and I said, "You know, I found a nail over there in that rock once." He said, "You did?" He said, "I looked for that." Could never find that.
That's funny.
Anyway, he mapped all of that back country, and bought the land sometimes for $2 or $3 an acre. I mean, things were
Wow.
very tight in those
Yeah,
days.
yeah,
So you remember?
Yeah.
No, you don't remember.
I don't
Sure
remember,
you-
but-
Right.
I believe you.
Yeah.
And so when you came back to live in Old Lyme, eventually you helped the town purchase a bunch of the property that you had.
Well, go back a step.
Okay.
Because when I'd come back, every now and then I'd drive around through Old Lyme, and I was startled to see the amount of change. The places that had been open woods were all built up, and that gave me a bad feeling.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't like that. Anyway, and that really got me interested in what's happening with the land in Old Lyme. So when I came back, I wanted to get into something that would help. The only thing I could really do was get into the Wetlands Commission. So I was on the Wetlands for, I think, a little over 23, 24 years.
Wow.
Something like that. Part-time as chairman, part-time as member. We helped rewrite the regulations and so on and so forth.
Wow.
Anyway, but even that wasn't enough. There was more. Still, building was going on at a pace, you know.
Yes.
And the Planning Commission, I've forgotten who ran the study. They had a study of open space in the town of Old Lyme, and I participated in that. One of the things they did for them was to make a series of maps showing the history of development through the town, and so that you could get a graphic picture of how much of the open land was disappearing into development.
Yep.
Anyway, so that got me more interested, and we had a piece of. I felt kind of guilty about all of this land that we had, and so on.
Sure.
So I gave a piece of land to the town for affordable housing up on Flat Rock Hill Road, where I think there are several units now.
Yeah.
And plans, I hope to do some adjacent lots too in the same area. It's nice because there's no stigma attached to a house here and there, but if there's a big block of affordable housing that people live in, it has a kind of a stigma attached, which shouldn't be there, but it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, and also the open space for just trails too is just beautiful property with.
Right,
great-
well that's the next thing, that was the next
Okay.
step. So the next step was, here we have all this land, which we're not using anymore, and if we don't do something, someday it'll gonna be developed,
Yeah.
and there'll be houses all over. So we went to the Nature Conservancy, and got them to put a conservation easement on it. They didn't want to, well, they were more interested in tidal areas because they thought those areas were most susceptible to having development. What they did, they took us on and gave us a conservation easement. And that, of course, lowered the value of the property, which it shouldn't have, of course, which it did for development, considerably. So later I suggested to the, one more step.
I'm with you.
Well, I was chairman of the Wetlands Commission. Reading the regulations, the state regulations said that Wetlands Commission could set up a subcommittee, or whatever, sub something, for open space in the town. So I went to the first selectman, said I wanted to do it, got permission to do it, and established an open space committee, subcommittee, under the Wetlands Commission. Later changed to the open space commission, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and with that, largely through George James and efforts and so on, we got quite a bit of land by getting cooperators and so on to contribute money, and by talking the town. What do you call it? The people who govern the money in the town.
The finance board.
Yeah, finance board. After presenting studies to them which showed that you can generally increase the taxes in the town by keeping open space. You don't have to provide police service. You don't have to provide all these other services to the land. And they finally became convinced that was so, and they agreed to fund open space on a fixed, regular basis, which was a victory for us.
Yes, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
That's really great.
Yeah, so that allowed us to move ahead a little bit more, So I feel pretty good about that.
Yeah.
And then along came the question of what do we do with this piece of land we have in a conservation easement. So I suggested to the open space people they might be interested, and they said yes they were, and they looked it over and bought it, At, of course, a reduced rate, of course, which was set because it had a conservation easement on it.
Yeah.
If it hadn't had the easement, they wouldn't have been able to afford it.
Yeah.
But that's the way it goes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it's incredible that there's so much land protected in Old Lyme. I mean, it's not that big a geographic area, but there's a lot of trails and a lot of protected wetlands and all of that.
All like the land trust and so on. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, they've done a wonderful job.
Yeah.
Not as good as Lyme, but Lyme.
They're bigger.
Yeah.
They're bigger areas too.
And they had larger. I think people who owned a large piece of land and weren't financially constrained in any way.
Yes.
So they.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we're very lucky to have you go through all those iterations and set stuff up, and the Wetlands Commission and.
Thanks to my father originally.
Yeah.
My father once said to me, someday the town is going to want this lake as a water supply. And I thought, oh, that's foolish. Come on, there's water. Now we know that water isn't that plentiful, and maybe someday they will need that. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And when Gene was running the horse farm, were you around that much during that time? Or?
Absolutely. Gene fell in love with horses early on. Absolutely, her whole life was horses, and raising horses, and having a barn to which many girls in Old Lyme came, and many came back summer after summer to work with the horses. Something about horses and girls. I don't know what it is. It's real. Yeah, and she became very well known. She raised Morgans that were known throughout this country, and some were exported to Europe.
Yeah.
She became an officer in the Morgan Horse Association and so on.
Yeah, and she wrote a great book about that. And,
a wonderful book called Alone with My Horse.
Yeah.
Wonderful book, yeah.
We had a little exhibit in the post office about Gene's work and the whole farm and stuff. So we do that now and then. So Dawn McCarthy helped us with a bunch of stuff, and it was really wonderful. So
I remember a nice story about I don't know if it's true, but it's a great story about the post office. When they redid the post office building, they discovered that between the slot from the outside and the bucket on the inside, there was a gap in the wall, and the gap was full of old letters.
That's amazing. So the one down where the...
I think it's baloney, but it's a great story.
I like that
Will you
story.
marry me from 20 years ago, you know?
And that was when maybe the Old Lyme Gazette was in that building when they were closing it down, right?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, that's neat, yeah. And that building had been the town hall.
I didn't know that.
And they moved it by oxen down and put another, it was the Mason's Hall. So they raised it up, and the hall was upstairs, and downstairs became the post office.
There was a lot of house moving in those days. Wood was hard to come by. John Pfeiffer, our historian, tells me that at one time there was so little local wood. The wood was brought in largely from Rhode Island for house building in Old Lyme.
Wow,
which
that's
is
amazing.
surprising. Yeah. And there were a lot of buildings in Old Lyme which were moved. Yeah, there was an inn near the church.
Oh yes.
It was moved to
The Old Lyme Inn.
moved into one of the back roads in Old Lyme.
Huh.
Yeah.
And this building too was down on
Was it?
Elm Street or one of the other streets.
Yeah.
It was a gun club.
Oh, I remember this. I remember this road when I was a kid, with elm trees that closed over the top of the road. It was a
Wow.
beautiful tunnel.
Wow.
Yeah, and then 1938 wiped them out.
Do you remember that hurricane?
Oh, I remember it very well. I remember seeing a house and a barn floating down the Connecticut River.
Wow.
Oh, it was something to
Yeah.
behold.
Yeah.
We had another one later on. I forget the year, but it must have been when I was a late teenager. The building my father and I made, this stone building. Mm-hmm. I had all the rafters up, and there was a hurricane forecast, so I went around to my neighbors and got chained, and I chained all the rafters together. And sure enough, we had the hurricane. Came on, we wind very strong and so on, and then we got the eye of the hurricane with dead and a kind of a green sky, and then the wind picked up and went the other way.
Wow.
Didn't lose a rafter.
Yay.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So, you must still know a lot of people in Old Lyme though, right?
Not so many, and I think largely because I didn't go to grade school here. I only went to grade school for a year.
Okay.
And so high school and grade school were in Illinois and so on. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And you went to school in New Haven when you were young, living in Old Lyme?
Yeah, my mother and father said, "Hey, you ought to go to this special school in New Haven." My oldest sister, Jean, refused somehow, or got off somehow. Anyway, so we'd drive in with him in the morning when he went to Yale. He'd drop us at school and then take the train back at the end of the day. We really didn't like it very much. It didn't last long. Yeah.
That's amazing. And you told me another story about a guy that your father ran into to become the counselor at his camp. Do you remember that story?
Oh yeah, a counselor at his camp. My father was walking along the street in New York one night, and he met a guy walking toward him. He had a bundle of something under one arm, and he had a man underneath the other arm. And he was drunk, and he was a big, rugged guy. And my father said, "Who's that?" And he said, "Oh, I just picked him up for ballast. I don't know who he is." He was born in South Africa. His father was a diamond dealer and a horse trader. There are big gaps that I don't know about. He went to University of Chicago. I think was finally kicked out because he was making booze in a bathtub. He taught himself all the Romance languages and Japanese and Chinese.
Wow.
He traveled throughout Europe on his own, I think on a bicycle. In addition to that, he had been a sailor on a square rigger, the last square rigger to carry U.S. freight, registered freight, a boat called the Tusitala, which they came in from a cruise, they tied up, he dove overboard to get a wash. He forgot about the Hudson River going miles an hour past him, wound up down in the end of the city with no clothes on, and had to make his way back up through.
That's funny. So he
wound up He was a counselor at the camp,
Okay.
and very well known to, I don't know if you any knew Andy and Mariana Pfeiffer? Andy was one of the students there. Andy's another miraculous guy in Old Lyme. Anyway, Stanley wound up as head of translation at the UN.
Wow.
Yeah. He lived on Whippoorwill Road. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great. Very nice.
I think he moved there to be near my folks in the farm, which
Sure.
is,
Yeah.
as did Andy Pfeiffer, who had been to the camp. Yeah.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
And then you also had a foster brother, right?
Had a brother who came to live with us. He had been abandoned in New York City, he and his mother, by his father during the Depression. He was somewhat older than I was. And we heard about him through somebody else, a woman who had been a friend of my mother's. So we took him in and he lived with us for lower grades all the way up through. Yeah.
That's
George
great.
Duncan. Yeah.
George Duncan.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. He has a piece of the farm on Whippoorwill Road where he built a house. Yeah.
Okay. That's so nice.
Yeah.
Well, it's
There was another guy, another old Lymer, who came to us because his mother, who knew my mother and had helped out at the camp, didn't want him to go to school in Brooklyn. Things were really tough on kids. So he came to live with us at high school age. His name was Elliot Ressler. He wound up here as a social worker in town.
Oh.
He got a degree from Rice. He became head of child adoption for the state of Connecticut, and then wound up as a social worker here.
That's amazing. Wow.
In addition to being drafted and fighting the Japanese all through the jungles and coming back, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. It seems like your family was very generous in helping others, and
Others who helped us too.
sure.
Yeah.
But
Let me tell you, I spent some time once with Dan Moore. Dan had been a selectman at one time.
okay.
And I really liked Dan a lot, right? And Dan described to me one day, he said, he said there used to be a store right here, which is where the art museum is now.
Yeah.
And he says, the only thing he ever had in that window was dried cod. Well, it gives you some flavor of the town.
Yeah.
And he said, well, you know what I used to do on a day off? He said, I'd go sit on the shore of the Connecticut River and watch the schooners tacking up the river, taking horse manure from the horse barns up to the tobacco fields. These are things, you never hear of, never think of anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he described how the town would shut off the main street and have dances in the street and all kinds of things. It was quite
great.
a town when he was young.
Yeah.
Yeah.
These things keep changing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I remember downtown, it was lively, with the hardware store with Mr. Rowling sitting out on his steps. And you'd say to him, Mr. Rowling, do you have so-and-so? He'd say, well, you go in there and look and, find it.
And Spencer's Market, you remember that?
And Mr. James, whose wife was the pharmacist, so whenever you had a drug, it had to be made by her in Saybrook. And
Right. Yeah.
Oh, and we had a grocery store, and we had a garage, we had all kinds of things. And it was the center of the town.
Yes. I remember that too. I'm not even not that young that I don't remember that.
There were words for it, uptown and downtown, upstreet and downstreet. You never hear upstreet and downstreet anymore. And you never hear anyone say, hey, yeah, the way it was come. All our language has changed.
Yeah.
Big changes, yeah. Remarkable town.
And you built your house that you're in today, right?
Yeah.
That's pretty neat.
Built that and built my daughter's house next door.
All right.
After building a house in California, which I sold, which helped pay for the house in Connecticut. Yeah, I did that one in my spare time while working there.
Well, and some people say they built a house, but they didn't actually build the house. They just
Oh no, we
got
built
something
that.
built.
Well, we dug it, poured the concrete, the whole.
Yeah.
My brother-in-law did the wiring and the plumbing. He lived in Saybrook, and they ran Saybrook contractors. They were called. They did electrical and plumbing. Yeah.
Nice.
They were all Mainers. Yeah.
Mainers, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
And was your wife from this area, or was she?
No, my wife comes from Maine.
Oh, from Maine, okay.
Yeah. She never lost it. One day, we're sitting in our house in Palo Alto, and the doorbell rings. So she goes to open the door, and here's a lady, all fancy coiffure and so on, and says to my wife, "Hello, I'm your Avon lady." My wife said, "No, you're not," and she closed the door. So she kept,
Wow,
but she was a sweetie.
that's great.
Yeah,
Yep, nothing like being direct, right?
that's right, absolutely. No fancy stuff.
Yeah.
No, she was very good.
Wow. Well, I think this has been a great interview. You've given us all kinds of stories that
Oh, it's a
I
great,
think we
it's
will.
a great place, this town.
Yeah,
It's wonderful.
yeah,
All kinds of miraculous people live here too. I mean, inventors and all kinds of people.
Yeah,
Doctors, lawyers. Yeah,
yeah,
great place.
yeah. You wonder what brings people here and what brings them back. I think there's a lot of us that have come back.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
can't get it out of your system, so.
Yeah.
That's-
Well, it still hasn't changed to any fatal degree. It still has a nice
Right,
street and,
right.
and good people.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely. Well, I really appreciate you coming in to talk to us. It's been great getting to know you
My
too,
pleasure.
because I know my father knew you, but I didn't really know you, so
Yeah.
for me it's a privilege, so.
I so enjoyed him. He was such a guy of principle. You could, it was great. You'd get somebody who was fudging a little bit in a meeting. He would, he wouldn't say it, but that it was great.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Oh,
I
my
appreciate
pleasure.
it, and
Thank you.
Oh,